Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this mock feedback presentation for the Making of America exam. Okay, so just a reminder that within this exam you need to be talking about lots of second order concepts, so you can just pause that and just remind yourself of the main second order concepts of cause and consequence, similarity and difference, significance and continuity and change. Okay, so we'll start by going through Making America question 1. These are the so-called gateway questions. They're short responses with a range of answers. So question 1A, identify one impact of mining on the areas where gold was found. So you can see that there is a range of different correct responses here. Just be aware that reference to saying just things like damage or violence or conflict is not specific enough on its own to get you a mark. 1B, give one example of how African Americans were discriminated against in the Union Army during the Civil War. So again, there's a range of answers for you to look at there. Just a reminder that referring to not being allowed to serve in the army would not get you the mark unless you said until later, or you said originally they were not allowed to serve in the army, because they African Americans were allowed to serve in the army to the Union Army towards the end of the Civil War. 1C, name one tribe involved in fighting wars with white settlers or the US government between 1861 and 1877. So you could get marks for the Santee Sioux, the Cheyenne, Lakota Sioux, or indeed saying Lakota, Apache. What wasn't going to get you the marks was any reference to the 5 civilized tribes. That's a little bit earlier on in the course. Quite a few people put that, so just be aware of the different time periods in Making America. Okay, so question 2, we used this question from People's Health. Write a clear and organised summary that analyses migration to places west of the plains between 1839 and 1860. Support your summary with examples. So the key thing for this question, you must link it to a second order concept. The easiest way to do it for this question is to link it to the idea of causation, about why different groups were moving west of the plains between 1839 and 1860. Clear and organised means specific knowledge. Analyse means to link to the second order concept. The key thing for this question actually is that you are in the correct time period, 1839 to 1860. So we had a number of people that were writing things about the railroads, for example. But actually you've got to stay on things like the gold rushes, for example, the overlanders, which is when people were going on the things like the Oregon Trail and the California Trail with their wagons, for example. And looking at the Mormons as well. So they would be key things to write about for this question. So a little checklist for this question. Make sure you do include information from the correct time period. That's absolutely crucial for these questions. You need precise and relevant knowledge. Organise each paragraph around a second order concept, and 2 clear examples fully explained, 2 paragraphs. You can write a 3rd paragraph if you want to. Just make sure that the 2 paragraphs you write are in depth and detailed enough. So you're probably looking for like 8-9 lines. And make sure that you are linking back the question using phrases like this shows that, this led to, as a result, this was an important reason because. So have a little look at how you could answer this. There's a little bit of language in the top right hand corner. So good language for causation would be things like this led to, this resulted in, this meant that, this exacerbated. So I've put here a couple of different paragraphs, one on causation and one on change, but you could easily do 2 paragraphs on causation for this question. I'm just kind of showing you that just to kind of give you a real focus on the second order concepts. So one paragraph might be, one reason that migrants moved west was because there was an economic downturn in the East in the late 1830s. Banks collapsed and many people lost their savings. Unemployment reached 25% in some areas and wages fell disastrously. By 1860, over 400,000 people had moved to the territories of Oregon and California, travelling in wagons on the overland trails. Other factors could be linked to the gold rush or, for example, the Mormons moving west, and lots of people identified the Mormons moving west because of religious persecution. But again, when you're writing about that, just make sure you go into enough depth and detail. So maybe why they were facing religious persecution, what happened to the Mormon leaders, what was the impact and role of people like Brigham Young, for example. So you just got that specific evidence within your answer. Paragraph 2 is actually linked to the second order concept of change. So we'll just read that one. In 1839, migration to the far west was limited. The only white people who ventured that far were the mountain men who roamed the Rocky Mountains, trapping beavers for their fur. However, by 1850, over 100,000 people had migrated in wagons on the overland trails to the west coast territory of California and Oregon, hoping to start a new life. By 1860, this had increased to over 400,000. So that has a little bit more of a focus on the aspect of change. Okay, so takeaways for question 2, make sure you decode the question carefully. You need that specific and detailed knowledge, and organise your answer around one or more second order concepts. So we're going to have a look at question number 3 now, and reminder that's the same type of question you do for people's health. So question 3 is always based around the second order concept of cause and consequence. So in this case, it's a why question. It's really important that you don't just describe the tensions for this question, but you are explaining the tensions and why they took place. So why were there tensions in America between 1789 and 1838? Explain your answer with examples. So if we decode the question focuses on cause, so why on causation. There's tensions in America, so you're going to focus on relations between the different groups of people. And we have emphasized in Making America that we've got 3 main groups. We've got white Americans, we've got black Americans, sometimes referred to as African Americans, and we've got the indigenous peoples, sometimes referred to as Native Americans. You're going to use specific knowledge, and you really need to link into that great SOC language around causation, or if it's a consequent question, it could be what was the impact of question, then you need to be using that language as well. So checklist for this question, make sure you are in the right time period. So you've got to be 1789 to 1838. We had a number of people that were writing things about the American Civil War, which isn't really within the correct time period. Make sure you're including precise and relevant knowledge, link to that second order concept, 2 clear examples in 2 fully explained paragraphs, and they've got to be really good detailed paragraphs. We're not looking for sort of 3-4 lines for each paragraph. You want to go into sufficient depth to hit the marks. And use of historical language that analyses, so phrases like this shows that can be really useful as well. So have a look at an example answer for this question. So first paragraph, one reason there was tension was because there were different opinions on slavery. And of course, many of you picked this out on the exam. Slavery had died out in the North, and Northerners said that slavery gave the South an unfair advantage in trade. But the South's economy was dominated by the plantation system, and huge profits were made through slave labour. This led to tension over whether or not to allow new states to use slavery. This had to be resolved through laws such as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. A second paragraph might be, there was also tension between natives or indigenous peoples and white settlers because the US government extended its control over the land. President Andrew Jackson wanted to see the spread of cotton plantations on native land, and in 1830 introduced the Indian Removal Act. This forced thousands of native tribes in the east, like the Seminoles and Creeks, out of their homeland. There was increased violence and tension as the tribes resisted, such as the Seminole Wars of 1835 to 1842. So you've got clear causation in both those, the cause of different opinions on slavery, or the cause over tensions between land ownership between white settlers and indigenous peoples, and it's explained with some really good supporting knowledge. So that's how you would do Making America question 3. So takeaways for question 3, decode the question carefully. You need that specific and detailed knowledge, and organise your answer around the SOC of cause and consequence. Okay, so we're going to look at Making America question 4 and 5 now. So for this question, just general tips for this. In terms of the levels, if you get 1 really good developed argument, then you're going to get level 3, 7 to 9. 2 developed arguments, level 4, 10 to 12. 3 developed arguments is 13 to 15, but it must be a balanced answer, so you can't have 3 agrees. If you have 3 agree arguments, you'll be capped at 12 out of 18. And then 4 developed arguments plus a clinching argument is level 6, 16 to 18. So start off your work, choose the question that you're going to do, choose the one that's going to be easiest for you, decode the question, so be clear on what it's asking you to do, and make sure you keep making links back to the question in your answer. That's a really crucial thing to do well on this question. Some of you miss doing that on this question. So at the end of each paragraph, you want to try and have a linking phrase which links back to the question and explains whether the evidence that you've been writing about really does agree or disagree with the interpretation. Make a quick plan if you want to, but do make that quite quick. You need to think about what's going to be in your 4 developed arguments, and then you need your 4 well-explained paragraphs, and each paragraph should include detailed and specific knowledge, analysis and explanation, and then making that clear link back to the question. Okay, so that's what we mean by developed argument, having that knowledge, that analysis, and the links, the clear links back to the question. Finish with a conclusion, that's known as a clinching argument. Now the essay is worth about 18 marks. You're going to want to be spending about 25 minutes on it in the exam, and obviously this accounts for quite a large proportion of the marks. So if you do really well on this question, you are well on your way to securing a really good mark. So it's absolutely crucial to do well on this question. So these were the two questions that you were set in the exam. Question 4 was from the 1860s onwards, the railroads were the most important reason for people settling on the plains. How far do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. And then the other question, which was much less popular, the growth of big business had a positive impact on the USA and its people between 1877 and 1900. How far do you agree? Give reasons for your answer. Okay, so just in terms of decoding the question, the most important reason bit tells you it's a causation focus. So you want to get that SOT language in about causation. The question already gives you a key factor to analyse for why people settled on the plains, i.e. the railroads. So that's going to be an absolutely crucial thing to think about. The time periods are also crucial. So you must not write about anything before the 1860s. Now we had a lot of people on this question writing about the Mormons, but the Mormons migrated in the towards the late 1840s. So that's not credible. So anything you write about the Mormons won't get you any marks at all, nor will anything like things like the California Gold Rush, for example. How far do you agree means they want you to look at other factors, and give reasons means that you need to use knowledge and analysis to have that developed argument. So that's what you need to do for the question. So you're going to make a quick plan. You know you need to have your 4 paragraphs plus your clinching argument, and the developed argument means specific and relevant knowledge, analysis using relevant second order concepts and historical language. In this case, the second order concept is about causation really, and then a clear link to the question. So you can use a phrase like, this shows that the railroads were the most important reason because, okay, or this shows that the railroads weren't the most important reason because actually cow towns and the development of cow towns were a more significant reason. So you're really starting to hammer and really focus in on the actual question. In terms of a plan, you might agree with the railroads and talk about things like how the railroads made things a little bit easier for people to get there, for example. You might even compare that back to how difficult the journeys were in the 1840s. But then other factors which you might disagree would be writing about the 1862 Homestead Act. You might disagree because you might talk about Benjamin Singleton and the Exodusters. And you might talk about the development of cattle towns and cattle ranches on the plains as well as a 4th argument. So that's how you would do this question. So in terms of structuring this answer, great causation language to use is things like this was influential because, this led to, this meant that, as a result of, consequently, this brought about, this led to. They're all going to be really great phrases for you to use. So we've got here an example answer, a full example answer for you to have a look at. So we might say something like, the newly built railroads were very important. They enabled people to travel easily to the plains. The railroad companies created demand for their railroads and land by promoting the West as a land of great opportunity. From the 1860s, they began a huge advertising campaign in America and in Europe. More settlers bought land from the railroad companies than gained land from the Homestead Act, showing the importance of the role of the railroads. So you've just got that kind of like crucial factor. You could sort of develop that by using phrases like, when people saw the adverts, they saw the promise of a new life, combined with the fact that land in Oregon and California was now really expensive. So it meant that sort of settling on the plains might be, you know, a good idea and might provide the opportunity that Americans were looking for. The Homestead Act is obviously important to write about. You can pause this and have a look at that in a bit more detail. The violence in the South. So when you're writing about the Exodusters, you could actually combine that with your knowledge from the 5th topic about how after 1877, the sort of failure of Reconstruction, there's quite a lot of racism and discrimination, and particularly in the South, and therefore many black people, sort of inspired by Benjamin Singleton and his idea of an exodus for black Americans, you know, went off to Kansas, okay, with sort of 6,000 arriving in 1879 alone. So that was kind of like the key factor there. So sometimes within these essays, it's about bringing in ideas from other things that you've learned about as well. And then the cattle industry as well is also another crucial reason for people settling on the plains. And there's actually a couple of arguments here. You could talk about, obviously, the development of the cow towns. You know, you could talk about the Goodnight Loving Trail, for example. But you could also talk about John Iliff and when he starts to put ranches onto the plains as well. That leads to more people settling on the plains in a different type of farming. In terms of a conclusion, just make sure it's clear, concise, and conclusive. So you might say something like, overall, it was a combination of factors that led to settlement of the plain. The railroads were very important as they enabled people to get there easily and advertise the benefits. They encouraged cowtowns and ranching. However, without the Homestead Act offering virtually free land, many of the settlers would never have contemplated the journey and the whole settlement would have been much slower. So that's making a really clear argument, recognising other factors, but ultimately talking about the Homestead Act being such a crucial factor. So it's good, for example, to kind of start off with one of those phrases, embrace the complexity, so be aware of other factors, and then explain your final opinion. So there's some ideas for question 4. Okay, so the rather less popular question, the growth of big business had a positive impact on the USA and its people between 1877 and 1900. How far do you agree? So positive impact tells you this is a consequence focus. The question gives you an interpretation to evaluate, i.e. that it had a positive impact. So the counter argument for this is obviously that it's going to be a negative impact. Time periods are crucial, so only write about 1877 to 1900. How far do you agree means they're looking for you to write about both sides of the argument. You need 4 key arguments and a degree of balance, and it is useful to try and space those arguments out using your paragraphs, so you're making it clear to the examiner where you have sort of separated your arguments out, so you've got your 4 sort of key opinions together. So actually structuring with the paragraphs is really, really important. So you're going to make the quick plan like we've seen before, and remember a developed argument is specific and relevant knowledge, analysis using SOC and historical language, and a clear link back to the question. So these are some of the things we could have talked about. We could talk about growth and jobs in the US economy. We could have talked about Andrew Carnegie as an example of a successful businessman. We could agree because of the sort of like impact on the plains and bonanza farms made some people financially wealthy. But then we could disagree because we could talk about the impact on the workers, or indeed those farmers on the plains that were sort of small holding farmers with their small homesteads couldn't compete with the bonanza farms from 1877. And then we could disagree and we could talk about environmental damage as well. Okay, so here is an example answer of this question. Okay, so you've got your 2 agrees, your 2 disagrees. Your agrees are in green, your disagrees in the sort of orangey type question, type colour. So you can pause this and read that example answer just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that you could be writing about. There's lots of other examples that you could talk about as well. And we had some really good answers that brought in some ideas about the impact of immigration because of big business as well. Okay, and that was really, really good as well. In terms of a conclusion, this would be an example conclusion. In the final analysis, there were both advantages and disadvantages to the growth of big business, and its impact depends a lot on whose perspective you are looking at it from. For the country's economy, it was probably a positive thing, but from the point of view of many workers, it may have given them jobs, but it kept wages low and downgraded their environment. Given the dramatic and devastating impact it had on workers and the environment, and how this would have negatively impacted more people than who gained, I would argue that big business had a negative impact on the USA. So some of these ideas, okay, top tip, using some of these tips within your main essay will help you really develop your arguments. So, you know, the idea of embracing complexity and explaining your final opinion, these are all really useful phrases to use just generally within your answer. Okay, so there's the takeaways for question 4 and 5. Make sure you decode the question carefully. 4 key arguments with a degree of balance, and make clear links back to the question to make sure you're fully answering the question. That's really, really crucial that you're getting that really good analysis in there. So that's the feedback on the Making of America exam and how to approach that exam. Hope you found that useful. Goodbye.